Elena Martinez wiped down the same table for the third time that evening, her movements automatic after 2 years of working at Rosario's, an upscale Italian restaurant in the heart of downtown Chicago. The dinner rush was winding down, and she found herself stealing glances at the corner booth where Vincent Castellano sat with his associates, their voices low and serious. She had served their table countless times over the past months, but Vincent never seemed to notice her beyond a brief nod when she refilled his espresso. To him, she was just another piece of furniture in his carefully controlled world. Elena had learned to move like a shadow around his table, efficient and invisible, exactly how she preferred it. Vincent Castellano was not a man who went unnoticed. At 35, he commanded respect through presence alone. His tailored suits never had a wrinkle out of place. His dark hair was always perfectly styled, and his steel-gray eyes missed nothing. As the youngest son of the Castellano crime family, he had earned his position through intelligence and ruthlessness, not just birthright. The restaurant served as one of his legitimate business fronts, though everyone knew the real discussions happened after hours. Elena kept her head down and her ears closed. She had her own secrets, her own reasons for wanting to remain unnoticed. Her real name was not Elena Martinez, and she was not the simple waitress she pretended to be. 3 years ago, she had been Detective Sarah Chen with the Chicago Police Department's Organized Crime Unit. 3 years ago, she had discovered corruption that went deeper than she ever imagined, involving people she trusted. 3 years ago, she had faked her death and disappeared into this new identity. Working at Rosario's had been risky, but she needed to be close to the Castellano family to gather intelligence. She had been building a case, collecting evidence piece by piece, waiting for the right moment to bring down the entire organization. Her handler from the FBI, Agent Robert Kane, met with her once a month in coded encounters, always pressing her for more information. Tonight felt different. Vincent's usual associates were there, his older brother Marco, his cousin Tony, and his trusted Lieutenant Jake. But there was tension in the air. Elena moved closer to their table under the pretense of cleaning nearby tables, straining to catch fragments of their conversation. "The shipment arrives Thursday night," Marco was saying, his voice barely above a whisper. "Pier 47, midnight." Elena's pulse quickened. This was the kind of information Agent Kane had been waiting for. The Castellanos had been suspected of running drugs through the port for years, but they had never been able to prove it. "Security will be tight," Vincent replied, his fingers drumming against the table. "The Torino family has been sniffing around our territory. They might try something." Elena focused on wiping down the neighboring table, her movements slow and deliberate. She needed to hear more details about the location and timing. "What about the girl?" Tony asked suddenly, and Elena's blood went cold. Were they talking about her? "What girl?" Vincent's voice carried a note of confusion. "The waitress," Tony clarified, jerking his head slightly in Elena's direction. "She's been hovering around our table all night. You think she's listening?" Elena forced herself to continue cleaning, her heart pounding so hard she was sure they could hear it. She had been too eager, too obvious in her attempts to eavesdrop. Vincent turned in his chair to look at her directly for the first time in months. His gray eyes studied her face with an intensity that made her skin crawl. Elena met his gaze briefly, offering a polite smile before looking away, playing the role of a slightly embarrassed waitress who had been caught lingering. "Her?" Vincent's voice held a note of dismissal. "She's been working here for years, barely speaks English. I doubt she understands anything we're saying." Elena had carefully cultivated that impression, speaking with a heavy accent during her first months on the job and pretending to struggle with complex English phrases. It had worked perfectly until now. "Still," Marco interjected, "maybe we should be more careful." Vincent waved a hand dismissively. "She's nobody, just part of the background." The words stung more than Elena expected them to. She had worked hard to be invisible, but hearing him dismiss her so casually brought back memories of being overlooked and underestimated throughout her career in law enforcement. As she walked back toward the kitchen, Elena caught sight of a familiar face at the bar. David Richards, a journalist who had been investigating the Castellano family for the Chicago Tribune, was nursing a whiskey and occasionally glancing toward Vincent's table. Elena's stomach dropped. David's presence here could complicate everything. She had known David before her supposed death. He had been persistent in trying to get information from the police department about organized crime activities. If he recognized her, her cover would be blown instantly. Elena tried to stay in the kitchen for the rest of the evening, but her manager sent her back out to help with closing duties. She kept her head down and moved quickly, hoping to avoid David's attention. But as Vincent's group prepared to leave, David approached their table. "Mr. Castellano," David said with a confident smile. "David Richards from the Tribune. I was wondering if I could ask you a few questions about the upcoming waterfront development project." Vincent's expression hardened. "I don't talk to reporters. It's just about your legitimate business interests," David pressed. "The community is curious about the economic impact of your investments." Jake stepped forward, his hand moving toward his jacket, but Vincent held up a hand to stop him. "Mr. Richards, I suggest you finish your drink and leave. This is not a place for interviews." David's eyes swept the restaurant, taking in every detail. His gaze lingered on Elena for a moment longer than the others, and she saw a flicker of recognition cross his face. Her blood turned to ice. "Of course," David said, backing away slightly. "I apologize for disturbing your evening." As David left the restaurant, Elena knew her time was running out. She had to accelerate her timeline and get the information about Thursday night's shipment to Agent Kane immediately. Later that night, after the restaurant closed, Elena walked home through the quiet streets, constantly checking over her shoulder. She had arranged to meet Kane the following morning, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. In her small apartment above a laundromat, Elena sat at her kitchen table and wrote down everything she had overheard. Pier 47, midnight, Thursday. Drug shipment. Possible conflict with the Torino family. She hid the note in the false bottom of her jewelry box and tried to sleep. Meanwhile, across town, Vincent sat in his study reviewing reports from his various business operations. He couldn't stop thinking about the evening's events. Tony's suspicions about the waitress seemed paranoid, but Vincent had learned never to ignore potential security threats. He made a mental note to have someone look into Elena Martinez's background. It was probably nothing, but in his business, paranoia kept people alive. At the same time, David Richards sat in his home office, staring at a photo on his computer screen. The photo had been taken 3 years ago at a police department function. In it, Detective Sarah Chen stood among a group of officers receiving commendations. David enlarged the image, focusing on her face, then compared it to his memory of the waitress at Rosario's. The resemblance was unmistakable, even with the different hair color and style. Sarah Chen was supposed to be dead, killed in what had appeared to be a random mugging gone wrong. But David had always suspected there was more to the story. He opened a new document and began typing. If Sarah Chen was alive and working undercover at a restaurant frequented by the Castellano family, it meant law enforcement was much closer to bringing them down than anyone realized. This could be the biggest story of his career. The next morning, Elena arrived at work early, nervous energy making her hands shake as she prepared coffee and set up tables. Vincent's group rarely came in during the day, so she hoped to get through her shift without incident and meet with Kane later. But at exactly 11 o'clock, Vincent walked through the front door alone. Elena's heart sank as he chose a table in her section and sat down, his gray eyes finding her immediately. "Good morning," she said in her practiced accent, approaching his table with a menu. "Coffee today?" Vincent nodded, studying her face intently. You've been working here long time, yes? 2 years, Elena replied carefully. I like this job. Where are you from originally? Vincent asked, accepting the coffee cup from her trembling hands. Elena had prepared for this question long ago. El Salvador. I come here with my family when I was a young girl. Vincent nodded slowly, but his eyes never left her face. Must be hard work being waitress. Long hours, not much pay. Is okay, Elena said, forcing a smile. I save money, maybe go to school someday. What would you study? Vincent's question seemed casual, but Elena could sense the trap being laid. Maybe nursing? Help people? Elena kept her answers simple, consistent with the character she had created. Vincent smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. That's very noble. Helping people is important work. Elena nodded and backed away from the table. I get your breakfast menu. As she walked toward the kitchen, Elena felt Vincent's eyes following her. Something had changed overnight. His attention felt different, more focused and dangerous. In the kitchen, she tried to calm her nerves by focusing on routine tasks. She had less than 6 hours before her meeting with Kane. She just needed to make it through the day without arousing more suspicion. But when she returned to Vincent's table with his breakfast order, she found him talking quietly on his phone. He looked up as she approached and ended his call. Thank you, Elena, he said, using her name for the first time in 2 years. The sound of her false name on his lips sent chills down her spine. Vincent had never bothered to learn her name before. His sudden interest could only mean one thing. He was having her investigated. Elena forced herself to smile and nod before walking away. She had to warn Kane that her cover might be compromised. But first, she had to get through the rest of her shift without giving Vincent any more reasons to be suspicious. As the lunch rush began, Elena threw herself into her work, serving customers and clearing tables with practiced efficiency. But she couldn't escape the feeling that everything was about to change. Vincent finished his meal slowly, making several phone calls and sending text messages. Each time Elena passed his table, he watched her with calculating eyes, as if he were solving a puzzle. When he finally left the restaurant, Elena felt like she could breathe again, but her relief was short-lived. Through the window, she saw Vincent getting into his car across the street, and instead of driving away, he simply sat there, watching the restaurant. Elena realized with growing horror that she was now under surveillance. Her carefully constructed life was beginning to crumble, and she had no idea how much Vincent suspected or how much time she had left. The game had changed, and Elena was no longer invisible. She was now very much on Vincent Castellanos' radar, and that was the most dangerous place she could possibly be. Elena managed to slip out the back entrance of Rosario's during the afternoon shift change, using the chaos of servers coming and going to avoid Vincent's surveillance. She took a complicated route through the city, doubling back several times and using public transportation to make sure she wasn't being followed before heading to her emergency meeting spot with Agent Kane. The abandoned warehouse on the south side of Chicago looked the same as always. Broken windows, graffiti-covered walls, and the lingering smell of rust and decay. Elena found Kane waiting in their usual spot on the 3rd floor, his face grim with concern. "We have a problem," Elena said without preamble. "Vincent is suspicious. He questioned me directly this morning, and he's having me watched." Kane, a tall man in his 50s with graying temples and tired eyes, looked up from the file he had been reading. "How much do you think he knows?" "I'm not sure yet, but there's more. David Richards, the journalist, was at the restaurant last night. He saw me." "I think he recognized me." Elena paced nervously across the dusty floor. "And I overheard details about a drug shipment. Pier 47, Thursday night at midnight." Kane's expression sharpened. "That's tomorrow night. This could be exactly what we need to bring down the entire operation." "You're not listening," Elena said, her voice rising. "My cover is blown. We need to pull me out now." "We can't," Kane said firmly. "You're the only asset we have inside the Castellano organization. If we extract you now, we lose everything we've worked for over the past 2 years." Elena stared at him in disbelief. "You're asking me to walk back into a death trap." "I'm asking you to do your job," Kane replied coldly. "You knew the risks when you signed up for this assignment." Elena had forgotten how ruthless Kane could be when it came to getting results. 3 years ago, when her life had fallen apart and she needed to disappear, he had offered her a chance for revenge against the corrupt system that had betrayed her. But now she was beginning to understand that Kane saw her as nothing more than a disposable asset. "What about David Richards?" Elena asked. "If he publishes a story about me being alive—" "We'll handle Richards," Kane interrupted. "Your job is to get more details about tomorrow night's operation. We need exact times, personnel involved, and specifics about what's being smuggled." Elena realized she had no choice. Kane held all the cards: her new identity, her protection, her future. If she refused to cooperate, she would be left completely alone and vulnerable. "Fine," she said. "But if this goes wrong, if Vincent discovers who I really am, then you'll handle it like the professional you are," Kane said, closing his file and standing up. "Contact me tomorrow after you have the information." As Kane left the warehouse, Elena remained behind, staring out through a broken window at the city skyline. She had once been a decorated police detective with a bright future ahead of her. Now she was trapped between a crime boss who was growing suspicious and a handler who viewed her as expendable. The next morning, Elena reported to work at Rosario's with a knot of anxiety in her stomach. Vincent wasn't there during the breakfast shift, which gave her time to think and plan. She needed to find a way to get close to his inner circle without raising more suspicion. Her opportunity came when Marco Castellano arrived for lunch with his wife and teenage daughter. Elena had served Marco before, but always when he was with Vincent or other members of the organization. Today, he seemed more relaxed, playing the role of family man rather than crime boss. "Uncle Marco!" a young woman called out as she entered the restaurant. Elena looked up to see a beautiful girl in her early 20s approaching Marco's table. She had long, dark hair and Vincent's distinctive gray eyes. "Sophia," Marco said warmly, standing to embrace her. "I wasn't expecting to see you today." "I finished my classes early," Sophia replied, taking a seat at the table. "Mom said you were having lunch here." Elena realized this must be Vincent's younger sister. She had heard the name mentioned occasionally, but had never seen Sophia before. As Elena approached to take their drink orders, she noticed Sophia studying her with curious eyes. "I don't think I've seen you here before," Sophia said to Elena with a friendly smile. "I work mostly dinner shifts," Elena replied in her accented English. "You want something to drink?" "Sophia is studying art history at Northwestern," Marco explained proudly. "She's going to graduate next year." Elena nodded politely and took their orders, but she could feel Sophia watching her throughout the meal. Unlike Vincent, whose attention felt calculating and dangerous, Sophia seemed genuinely interested in the people around her. Later, as Elena was clearing their table, Sophia approached her alone while Marco was outside taking a phone call. "You know," Sophia said quietly, "your English is much better than you pretend it is." Elena's heart skipped a beat, but she kept her expression neutral. "I practice every day. Want to improve." Sophia studied her face for a moment longer, then smiled. "I think that's admirable. It takes courage to reinvent yourself." The words seemed to carry deeper meaning, and Elena wondered if Sophia suspected something or was simply making conversation. Before she could respond, Marco returned, and Sophia returned to her normal demeanor. But the interaction left Elena unsettled. If Vincent's sister could see through her act so easily, how long would it be before Vincent himself figured it out? That evening, as Elena prepared for the dinner shift, she noticed increased activity around the restaurant. More men in expensive suits were arriving, and the conversations were more subdued than usual. She recognized this pattern from her police work. It was the calm before a major operation. Vincent arrived at 6 o'clock with his usual group, but tonight there were additional faces Elena didn't recognize. The tension in the air was palpable, and Elena realized tonight was likely the final planning session before tomorrow's drug shipment. As she served their table, Elena caught fragments of conversation about security details, backup plans, and contingencies if law enforcement showed up. Vincent was clearly the one in charge, orchestrating every detail of the operation with military precision. "The boats will be in position by 11:30, Jake was saying as Elena refilled water glasses. "If anything goes wrong, we have 3 different escape routes." "What about the Torino family?" Tony asked. "Our sources say they're definitely planning something." Vincent's jaw tightened. "Let them come. We'll be ready for them." Elena moved away from the table, her mind racing with the new information. Multiple boats, escape routes, potential conflict with a rival family. This was much bigger than a simple drug shipment. This could be a war zone. As the evening wore on, Elena noticed David Richards enter the restaurant again. This time, he took a seat at the bar and ordered dinner, his eyes constantly scanning the room. Elena tried to avoid his section, but the restaurant was busy, and she couldn't stay in the kitchen all night. When she finally had to pass close to where David was sitting, he called out to her softly. "Elena, isn't it?" he said, using her false name, but pronouncing it with perfect American pronunciation. Elena nodded nervously, not trusting herself to speak. "I'm David Richards. I'm a journalist with the Tribune." He extended his hand, but Elena pretended not to understand and simply smiled politely. "I don't speak much English," she said in her accented voice. David's eyes narrowed slightly. "That's interesting, because I could swear I've seen you somewhere before, maybe at a police function a few years ago?" Elena's blood turned to ice, but she forced herself to look confused. "Police? No, I never been to police." "My mistake," David said with a knowing smile. "You just have one of those familiar faces." As Elena walked away, she realized David was definitely onto her. She needed to warn Kane immediately, but first, she had to get through the rest of the evening without arousing more suspicion from Vincent's group. But her worst fears were realized when she saw Vincent watching her conversation with David. His gray eyes were cold and calculating, and Elena knew he had seen enough to confirm his suspicions. When Vincent's group finally left the restaurant, Elena noticed that Jake lingered behind, pretending to use the restroom while the others went to their cars. She realized with growing terror that she was being set up for surveillance or worse. Elena finished her shift as quickly as possible and slipped out the back exit, but she could sense someone following her. She took a circuitous route home, using every counter-surveillance technique she had learned in her police training. When she finally reached her apartment building, Elena looked up at her windows and saw that the lights were on. She hadn't left any lights on when she went to work that morning. Someone was in her apartment. Elena considered calling Kane, but she realized her phone might be compromised. Instead, she circled the building and entered through the basement laundry room, using the service elevator to reach her floor. She could hear voices coming from inside her apartment as she approached her door. Carefully, she pressed her ear against the wood and listened. "There's nothing here," she heard Jake's voice saying. "Just normal apartment stuff." "Keep looking," another voice replied. Elena recognized it as Tony. "Vincent wants to know everything about this girl." Elena's heart pounded as she realized Vincent's men were searching her apartment. She had been careful to maintain her cover identity, but if they found the false bottom in her jewelry box where she kept her notes, everything would be over. She waited in the hallway for what felt like hours until she finally heard the men leave. Only after their footsteps had faded completely did she dare to enter her apartment. Everything looked normal at first glance, but Elena could tell the place had been thoroughly searched. Drawers had been opened and carefully closed, furniture had been moved slightly, and her personal items had been examined and replaced. Elena rushed to her jewelry box and checked the false bottom. Her notes were still there, but the box had clearly been handled. Either Vincent's men hadn't found the hidden compartment, or they had found it and left the notes as a trap. Either way, Elena knew her time was up. She had to make a choice: run now and abandon everything she had worked for, or stay and risk everything on one final gamble. As she sat on her bed, surrounded by the evidence of the search, Elena made her decision. She would stay for one more night. She would get the final details about the drug shipment. And then she would disappear forever. But first, she had to survive the next 24 hours without Vincent Castellano discovering that the invisible waitress he had dismissed so easily was actually Detective Sarah Chen, the woman who was going to bring down his entire criminal empire. Tomorrow night at Pier 47, everything would come to a head. Elena just hoped she would live long enough to see Vincent Castellano finally pay for his crimes. Elena barely slept that night, jumping at every sound outside her apartment. She had packed a small bag with essentials and hidden it in the laundry room downstairs, ready for a quick escape if necessary. At 5 in the morning, she received a text message from an unknown number. "We know who you are, Sarah. Meet us at the pier tonight if you want to live." The message could only have come from Vincent or his people. Elena stared at the phone screen, her hands shaking. Her worst fears had been confirmed. Her cover was completely blown. But instead of running, she made a decision that surprised even herself. She would go to the pier tonight, but not as Vincent expected. Elena spent the morning making preparations. She contacted Kane through their emergency channel, leaving a coded message that would alert the FBI to the night's operation. Then she visited 3 different locations around the city where she had hidden backup equipment during her undercover assignment: fake identification, cash, weapons, and communication devices. When she arrived at Rosario's for what she knew would be her final shift, Elena carried herself differently. The scared, subservient waitress was gone, replaced by the confident police detective she had once been. She no longer bothered with the heavy accent or the clumsy mannerisms. Vincent was waiting for her. He sat at his usual corner table, but today he was alone. His gray eyes tracked her movement as she entered the restaurant, and Elena saw something she hadn't noticed before: a mixture of anger and what almost looked like hurt betrayal. "Good morning, Detective Chen," Vincent said quietly as she approached his table. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Elena met his gaze steadily. "Good morning, Mr. Castellano." "Please, sit down," Vincent said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "I think we have a lot to discuss." Elena remained standing. "I prefer to stand, thank you." Vincent studied her face for a long moment. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" Elena asked. "I expected fear," Vincent replied. "Instead, I see defiance. It's almost admirable." The restaurant was empty except for kitchen staff, and Elena realized Vincent had probably arranged for them to have privacy. She glanced toward the exits, calculating distances and escape routes. "Don't worry," Vincent said, following her gaze. "I'm not going to hurt you. At least not here, not now. I'm curious about something." "What's that?" "How long have you been planning to destroy my family?" Vincent's voice was calm, but Elena could see the tension in his jaw and the way his fingers gripped his coffee cup. 3 years, Elena said honestly. "Since the day your corrupt cops murdered my partner and tried to kill me." Vincent's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" "Detective Michael Torres," Elena said. "My partner in the organized crime unit. He discovered that half the police department was on your family's payroll. When he tried to expose the corruption, your people arranged for him to be killed in what looked like a gang shooting. I don't know anything about that, Vincent said, but Elena could see uncertainty in his expression. Maybe you don't, Elena agreed. But your father did. Your brother Marco did. They ordered the hit to protect their investments in the police department. Vincent was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Elena could see him thinking, probably wondering if what she was saying was true. Even if that's true, Vincent said finally, it doesn't justify what you've done. You've infiltrated my operation under false pretenses. You've violated our privacy, our trust. Your trust? Elena laughed bitterly. Vincent, you never even saw me before yesterday. I was invisible to you for 2 years. I was just part of the furniture in your restaurant. Something flickered across Vincent's face. Was it shame? Embarrassment? Elena couldn't be sure. That's not... You don't understand, Vincent said, his composure slipping slightly. What don't I understand? Elena pressed. Vincent stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. He began pacing behind the table, his hands clenched into fists. You think I didn't notice you? He said, his voice rising. You think I didn't see you every night moving through this restaurant like you owned it? You think I didn't notice the way you smiled at other customers but barely looked at me? Elena stared at him in shock. This was not the reaction she had expected. I noticed everything about you, Vincent continued, his control completely shattered now. The way you tucked your hair behind your ear when you were nervous. The way you bit your lip when you were concentrating. The way you laughed with the kitchen staff when you thought no one was watching. Vincent, Elena started to say, but he cut her off. Do you know what it's like? Vincent demanded. Being surrounded by people who only see your power, your money, your family name. Everyone wants something from me. Everyone fears me or tries to use me. But you treated me like I was nobody special, like I was just another customer. Elena felt the conversation spinning out of control. This was not supposed to be a personal confession. Vincent was supposed to be cold, calculating, emotionless, not this vulnerable man standing in front of her. And then I find out you were lying, Vincent said, his voice dropping to a whisper. You were watching me, studying me, planning to destroy everything I've worked for. All that time, when I thought you were the only person who saw me as just a man, you were actually seeing me as a target. The pain in his voice was raw and real, and Elena felt an unexpected pang of guilt. She hadn't intended to hurt him personally. She had been focused on justice, on bringing down a criminal organization, on avenging her partner's death. I was doing my job, Elena said quietly. Your job, Vincent repeated, laughing bitterly. Yes, I suppose it was just a job to you. Vincent walked to the window and stared out at the street. When he spoke again, his voice was carefully controlled. I could have you killed tonight at the pier, he said matter-of-factly. My men are expecting you to show up. They have orders to eliminate the threat to our operation. But you won't, Elena said with more confidence than she felt. Vincent turned to face her. What makes you so sure? Because if you wanted me dead, I'd already be dead. You've had plenty of opportunities. Vincent smiled grimly. You're right. I won't kill you. But I can't let you destroy my family either. What are you proposing? Elena asked. Come with me tonight, Vincent said. Not as my prisoner, but as a witness. Let me show you that not everything my family does is evil. Let me prove to you that there's more to this business than the corruption and violence you've seen. Elena stared at him in disbelief. You want me to attend your drug smuggling operation as a character witness? It's not drugs, Vincent said flatly. What? The shipment tonight. It's not drugs, it's medicine. Elena felt the ground shift under her feet. What kind of medicine? Vincent hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. Insulin, cancer medications, heart drugs, all legitimate pharmaceuticals that we buy in bulk from overseas suppliers and distribute to clinics in low-income neighborhoods at cost. That's not possible, Elena said weakly. Why not? Vincent challenged. Because we're criminals, we can't do anything good? Because we're the Mafia, we can't care about our community? Elena's mind raced. If Vincent was telling the truth, then she had completely misunderstood the nature of the operation. But it could also be an elaborate lie designed to throw her off. Prove it, Elena said. Vincent nodded. Come with me tonight. See for yourself. And if you're lying, if this is a trap, then you'll die, Vincent said simply. But if I'm telling the truth, then maybe you'll understand that the world isn't as black and white as you think it is. Elena knew she should refuse. She should stick to the plan, let the FBI raid the pier, and let the truth sort itself out later. But Vincent's words had shaken her certainty. Why should I trust you? Elena asked. Because, Vincent said, stepping closer to her. Despite everything that's happened, despite all the lies between us, I think we understand each other. We're both people who have been betrayed by those we trusted. We're both fighting for something we believe in. Elena looked into his gray eyes and saw something she hadn't expected to see. Sincerity. Either Vincent was an incredible actor, or he was telling her the truth about the medical supplies. If I come with you tonight, Elena said slowly, what happens afterward? That depends, Vincent replied. If you still believe I'm a monster after you see the truth, then you'll do whatever you think is right. But if you realize that maybe things aren't what they seem, then maybe we can find another way forward. Elena thought about Agent Kane, waiting for information about the raid. She thought about her partner, Michael, dead because of corruption tied to the Castellano family. She thought about 3 years of careful planning and investigation. And then she thought about Vincent's confession, his vulnerability, his claim about the medical supplies. Okay, Elena said finally. I'll come with you tonight. Vincent looked surprised, as if he hadn't expected her to agree. You will? But I have conditions, Elena continued. No weapons pointed at me, no restraints. And if I decide to leave at any point, you let me go. Vincent nodded slowly. Agreed. As Elena left the restaurant that afternoon, she sent a coded message to Kane, changing the rendezvous point for the FBI raid. She couldn't tell him about Vincent's claims without more proof, but she could buy herself time to discover the truth. That evening, Elena met Vincent at a warehouse near the waterfront. He was dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, looking more like a businessman than a crime boss. Jake and Tony were there, along with several other men Elena recognized from the restaurant. You sure about this, boss? Jake asked, eyeing Elena suspiciously. I'm sure, Vincent said firmly. Elena is going to help us with the delivery tonight. As they drove toward the pier, Elena felt her heart pounding. She was either about to witness proof of Vincent's claims, or she was driving toward her own execution. But as they approached Pier 47, Elena saw something that made her breath catch. The vehicles waiting at the pier weren't the typical trucks used for drug smuggling. Instead, there were medical transport vans from 3 different community health clinics. Men and women in scrubs and medical uniforms stood waiting next to the vehicles. Dr. Martinez, Vincent called out to an older Hispanic man as they approached. Is everything ready? We've been waiting for you, Vincent, Dr. Martinez replied with genuine warmth. The clinic has been out of insulin for 3 days. Our diabetic patients are desperate. Elena watched in amazement as Vincent's men carefully unloaded boxes of medical supplies from a boat that had arrived from international waters. Each box was clearly labeled with pharmaceutical names and handled with the care appropriate for life-saving medications. This can't be legal, Elena said to Vincent as they watched the transfer. It's not completely illegal either, Vincent replied. Gray market pharmaceuticals. We buy them legally overseas and import them through creative channels. The markup on prescription drugs in this country is criminal. People are dying because they can't afford their medications. Elena saw tears in Dr. Martinez's eyes as he examined a box of cancer drugs. These medications would cost 10 times as much if we bought them through official channels, he told Elena. Vincent's family has been supplying our clinics for 5 years. They've saved hundreds of lives. As the operation continued, Elena realized that everything she thought she knew about Vincent's business was wrong. This wasn't a drug smuggling operation. It was a humanitarian mission operating outside legal channels because the legal system had failed the people who needed help most. The Torino family wants to shut us down, Vincent explained as they watched the medical teams load their vehicles. They make money selling drugs and running protection rackets in these same neighborhoods. Our medical operation cuts into their business by helping people instead of exploiting them. Elena felt her world tilting on its axis. If this is what you really do, why didn't you tell me sooner? Would you have believed me? Vincent asked. Or would you have assumed I was lying to save myself? Elena knew he was right. She would never have believed such an incredible story without seeing it herself. As the last of the medical supplies were loaded and the clinic teams prepared to leave, Elena heard the distant sound of sirens. Her heart sank as she realized what was happening. FBI! Came the shout as federal agents surrounded the pier. Elena saw Agent Kane among them, his face grim with determination. This is a federal operation! Everyone on the ground now! Vincent looked at Elena with disappointment and betrayal. You led them here! I changed the meeting point, Elena said desperately. I sent Kane to a different location. But as the FBI agents moved in, Elena realized what had happened. Kane must have been monitoring her communications more closely than she knew. Or worse, he had known about the medical supply operation all along and hadn't cared. Vincent Castellano, you're under arrest, Kane announced, his gun drawn. Elena stepped between Kane and Vincent. You can't arrest him for this. Kane's face twisted with anger. Get out of the way, Chen. Don't make this harder than it has to be. These are medical supplies, Elena said loudly, hoping the other agents could hear. Life-saving medications for community health clinics. These people are helping sick patients who can't afford treatment. Elena, Vincent said softly behind her. It's over. Don't throw away your life for me. But Elena had made her choice. After seeing the truth about Vincent's operation, after witnessing the gratitude of the medical teams, after understanding how wrong she had been about everything, she couldn't let Kane arrest an innocent man. I resign from this operation, Elena announced. Vincent Castellano is not the criminal you think he is. Kane's face went red with rage. You're making the biggest mistake of your life, Chen. As chaos erupted around them, with FBI agents trying to secure the scene and Vincent's men scattering, Elena grabbed Vincent's hand. We need to go, she said urgently. Together they ran toward the edge of the pier as gunshots echoed behind them. Elena's 3-year mission to destroy Vincent Castellano had ended in the most unexpected way possible, with her risking everything to save him. As they disappeared into the Chicago night, Elena realized that sometimes the line between justice and injustice wasn't as clear as she had once believed. And sometimes, the person you think is your enemy might actually be fighting for the same things you are, just in a different way. Vincent's jealousy and reckless emotions had exposed them both, but they had also revealed a truth that changed everything. The invisible waitress and the Mafia boss were both more complicated than they had appeared, and their story was just beginning.